Hello everyone, I am Anastasia Jirwa. Today I am back with a new topic of fundamental of nursing. This topic is very easy because we've been dealing with this since our school days. The topic for today is body defenses, immunity and immunization. So by the name itself, we can understand that we are going to deal about immunity as well as immunization, which will help to protect us from different diseases. So, for example, you guys must have planned a day to go for a picnic. And when you guys get up early in the morning, everything looks so good, it's sunny, and you guys continued with your plan. So by 12 o'clock, imagine 12 o'clock afternoon, it started raining. So how will you guys be? You guys anyway were not prepared for this weather because when you guys got up early in the morning, it was sunny. So for sure, you guys will be wearing light clothes. So as soon as it starts raining, you guys will get wet and the weather will be so cold, right? So the next day, you will find that maybe at least one or two of your friends might have suffered from cold or cough because of the weather or because you guys had got wet the other night. As well as you see some of your friends who were there with you at that time are still fit and fine. Why is it that some of them tend to fall sick and why is it that there has been no effect to the others? This is because the body of those people might have developed certain defense mechanism in order to control and cope up with the microorganism that was trying to attack their immune system. So, moving on to the definition of immunity. What do you think is immunity? Immunity is defined as the resistance of a host to certain injuries which can be caused due to the microorganisms as well as their products. Here, the immune response is concerned with the reaction of the body towards the foreign antigen. So what does immunity means? In simple word, immunity is nothing but the resistance of the body of an individual towards any microorganism that tries to enter their body in order to harm them. Here we will see that our body has three lines of defense. The first line of defense, the second line of defense, and the third line of defense. So let us look at each line of defense in detail. What is first line of defense? The way an organism primarily responds to the antigen is through the first line of defense. Here, what is the role of this? The role of this first line of defense is simply to prevent the introduction of the pathogens into the body through physical or chemical barriers. So, here we can understand that the first line of defense is the primary response which occurs when the antigen tries to penetrate into the body. What is the role? As I've said, these first line of defense will try to fight against the antigen from entering into the body of the individual. How can this be done? This can be done by two barriers. The first one, which is the physical barrier, and the second, which is the chemical barrier. So here, being a non-specific response, the first line of defense will fight against all the antigens or the pathogens which tries to enter the body of an individual with no memory of it, which means these first line of defense will not have any memory of the antigens that tries to penetrate or that tries to enter the body. They will fight against any type of antigens in the same manner. So here, the first line of defense is basically a combination of physical and chemical barriers that tries to fight against any antigen that tries to enter into the body. Since this is a non-specific response, they will fight against any type of agents that tries to harm them with no memory of the pathogens and try to fight each one of it in the same manner. As I've repeatedly told that the first line of defense consists of the physical as well as the chemical barrier, we will see that the physical barrier consists of the skin as well as the mucous membrane. Now let's look what does the skin and the mucous membrane does. Here the skin cells are filled with keratin. So what does this keratin do? This keratin makes the skin impenetrable, means nothing can penetrate through the skin surface. It also makes it waterproof as well as resistance to any disruptive toxins and most invaders. Even if there are presence of dead cells in the skin, these dead cells are being shed and replaced. It is known that nearly 1 million of dead cells are being shed and replaced every 40 minutes, taking their microbes with them. Next, what is mucous membrane? Mucous membrane, as we all know, is a fluid which is moist and is present in the inner surface of the respiratory, digestive, urinary, as well as the reproductive system in order to protect the inner lining of this system. So, even if the antigen has penetrated through the skin, they will then face the mucous membrane, which will not allow them to penetrate further because this mucous membrane will try to fight against the antigen. However, we will see that mucous membrane are more vulnerable than skin. Moving on to the chemical barrier. Here, we will find that the sweat which is produced by the glands which is present in our body will wash away the microbes and their acidity in order to slow their bacterial growth. We will also see that the mucous membrane will produce a sticky mucus in order to trap the dirt or the antigen which tries to enter the body. And also, the saliva and tears contain an enzyme called lysosome. So, what does this lysosome do? This lysosome kill the bacteria by rupturing their cell wall. The earwax, which is also known as cerumen, which is produced in the ear canal, also formed as a chemical barrier in order to prevent the penetration of any dust particles or any antigen from entering inside the body. So those are the things that falls under the first line of defense. As I've said, first line of defense is the primary response to the antigen. Here it consists of the physical and chemical barrier. The physical barrier, which consists of the skin as well as the mucous membrane, and the chemical barrier, which consists of the earwax, the saliva, the tears, the sweat, as well as the mucous membrane. So, moving on to the second line of defense. Here, the second line of defense consists of the defensive cells, defensive proteins, inflammation, as well as fever. So now let's look at each one of it in detail. So, defensive cell. Here, what happens if a pathogen has penetrated and has crossed the first line of defense? These cells will come into action. What does these cells do? These cells play a role of inhibiting or destroying the pathogens from further harming the body. These cells are also non-specific, that is, they will fight against any type of pathogens that tries to enter the body without having a memory of each of it. This killing or destroying of the pathogens can be done by phagocytes. What does these phagocytes do? These phagocytes will engulf the pathogens, the damaged tissues or the dead cells through neutrophils and macrophages. Next, if these pathogens are too big for the phagocytes to perform their function, then these eosinophils will discharge the destructive enzyme in order to kill these types of pathogens. There are also presence of the natural killer cells which will seek out the abnormal cells and kill them. Moving on to the defensive protein. This consists of interferon protein. So what happens here is when a virus enters the cell, the infected cell will produce interferon. So what happens is these interferon will bind with the other cells which had become infected with the virus and will stimulate these cells to produce antiviral protein that will prevent the virus from further making copies of itself. So once this is done, the interferon will attract and they will stimulate the natural killer cell to destroy them. So as I've said, what happens here is here when the virus enters, it will penetrate to the cells. And these cells, these infected cells will produce interferon. What does this interferon do? This interferon will also go and bind along with the other cells that has been infected with the virus. Once it has binded all of those cells, it will stimulate those cells to produce antiviral proteins in order to prevent them from further making copies of itself. And once this is done, these interferons will also attract and they will stimulate the natural killer cells to kill them. Moving on to the complement system. This consists of cell lysis, which means destruction of the pathogens. It also consists of opponization, which simply means the enhancement of phagocytosis, and it also leads to the stimulation of the inflammation as well as chemotaxis, which means here they will attract the macrophages as well as the neutrophils in order to destroy the pathogens. Now moving on to what is inflammation. Inflammation occurs when the body tissues are being injured or damaged. Here, when these tissues are injured or damaged, a series of events called the inflammatory response occurs. What are these events? The first one is redness. As we all know, once a person is injured, there will be certain inflammation that would occur, which would be first recognized by redness. Redness is caused because of the increased blood flow to the damaged area. As soon as redness occurs, there will also be presence of heat. Heat occurs because there will be increased blood flow to the particular area, which would increase the metabolic rate of the body cells. So as soon as redness occurs, heat occurs, then it is very common that swelling will also occur. And if these had occurred, the person will also be experiencing pain in the particular area. Next is fever. As we all know, fever is defined as an abnormal high temperature which is present in an individual. So, if the body temperature is higher than the normal level, a person is considered to be having fever. In this case, this abnormal high body temperature can be caused by pyrogens. What are these pyrogens? Pyrogens here are the chemicals that set the thermostat in the brain to a higher degree. If a person is suffering from a mild or moderate fever, this will help the body to fight against the bacterial infection by slowing the growth of bacteria and stimulate the body defense mechanism. So, fever can also act as the body's second line of defense if the person is having a mild or a moderate fever, because this would lead the body to fight against the bacterial infection and it will ultimately lead to the slow growth of the bacteria and stimulate the body response. Moving on to the last line of defense, which is the third line of defense. This third line of defense consists of the immunity. As we all know, immunity means protection from infection. The cells and molecules which are responsible for immunity constitute the immune system. These cells and molecules will coordinate with each other in order to fight against any foreign substances that tries to enter the body. When the first line as well as the second line of defense cannot prevent the pathogens or the agents from entering the body, this is when the immune system will act in order to eliminate these pathogens and prevent the body from further getting infected. The immune response or the immunity has two steps. The first one is the recognition of the pathogens or the foreign molecule. And the second one is the mounting reaction against the pathogen to eliminate it from the body. So, the first step is this immunity should first recognize any foreign molecule or pathogens that tries to enter the body, and the second, they should mount the reaction against these pathogens and try to eliminate them from the body as soon as possible. Here, the immunity is of two types. The first is the natural immunity, and the second is the acquired immunity. The acquired immunity is further divided into four subtypes. The first one, it is the natural acquired immunity. The second one is the artificially acquired active immunity. The third is the naturally acquired passive immunity. And the last is the artificially acquired passive immunity. Natural immunity is the resistance to a disease which is possessed by an individual. This can be an inherited one. So, what happens here is these individuals will be having this immunity by themselves without the need of any external factors in order to prevent themselves from getting infected with these kinds of diseases. Might be very prone to develop fever, whereas some may not. Why? This is simply because their body has developed those immunity in order to fight against these kinds of microorganisms that can cause the infection. Acquired immunity. Acquired immunity is the immunity that is produced by an exposure to a microorganism which stimulate the production of antibodies. So here what happens is when a person is repeatedly being exposed to these microorganisms, their body will start developing these antibodies which will fight against these microorganisms and prevent the particular individual to suffer from this infection. Only with the natural immunity, it is sometimes not possible to fight against each and every infection and survive. So, immunity is induced into the individual to fight against these kinds of microorganisms. These acquired immunities are not inherited. So, this immunity is developed during a person's lifetime. This immunity can also be acquired actively or passively. So now we have got an idea what an natural immunity is and what an acquired immunity is. Natural immunity is the immunity which is present in an individual without the introduction of any external factors. Why? Because here, if the person is constantly being exposed to the same kind of microorganism, their body will themselves produce the antibodies which will fight against these microorganisms. So now let's further study about the various subtypes of this acquired immunity. The first one is the natural acquired immunity. This immunity is acquired when a person is consistently being exposed to the natural infections or to some antigens in their day to day life. Following this exposure, the immune system will themselves respond to these antigens by producing the antibodies. Next is the artificially acquired active immunity. What is this? This is the immunity which is acquired by the individual by administering some specially prepared antigens in order to produce the antibodies. So, this can be in the form of vaccination, where the inactivated bacterial toxins, which is also known as toxoids, killed or living but attenuated microorganisms are being administered into the individual's body so that they lose their ability to cause the disease but will still be capable of stimulating the immune system. The third one is the naturally acquired passive immunity. This usually occurs during the pregnancy period. Here, what happens is that there will be a natural transferring of the antibodies from the mother to the fetus through the placenta or the breast milk, which will provide immunity to the newborn for a few days or maybe a few months. Here, what happens is the fetus will be immune to certain types of diseases that the mother is also immune, but this will only last for a short period of time. Moving on to the last subtype, which is the artificially acquired passive immunity. Here, what happens is that the antibodies are administered directly to the body in order to stimulate the immune response. These antibodies are either produced in humans or animals, and they are found in the serum after the administration. That is why this is also termed as serum or sera. Here we will also see that the immunity is further being divided into two more classification. The first one, which is the innate immunity, and the second one, which is the adaptive immunity. The adaptive immunity is further divided into two more subtypes, that is the humoral immunity as well as the cell-mediated immunity. So let us look what this innate immunity as well as the adaptive immunity is all about. Here, the innate immunity is the resistance to an infection which an individual possesses due to its genetic and constitutional makeup. However, this can be specific or non specific. Here, it means that this immunity will be developing in the body of an individual due to its genetic and constitutional makeup. So, this reflects the first and the second line of defense from infection. This immunity usually exists before encountering any infectious agent. That is, the defense mechanism will already be present in the body of an individual before he or she is being infected with this certain type of microorganisms, because this defense mechanism would already be inherited from their parents. This mechanism is non-specific. That is, this will fight against any type of microorganisms that tries to penetrate their body in the same manner. They will not be having any distinction between any type of microorganism. So, what are the components of this innate immunity? The first component is the physical as well as the chemical barrier. Physical barrier, as we have discussed, consists of the skin and the mucous membrane, and the chemical barrier can consist of the sweat, the saliva, the tears, the earwax, as well as the mucous membrane. It also consists of the effector cell, that is the macrophages, neutrophils, eosinophils, as well as the phagocytes. It also further consists of the blood proteins as well as the cytokinase. Moving on to the last subtype of immunity, that is the adaptive immunity. This immunity consists of the defense mechanism which will produce in the body of an individual when they are repeatedly being exposed to certain types of antigens. The mechanism of this immunity is specific because it has the ability to distinguish among the different, even closely related microorganisms. So, here in the innate immunity, the mechanism is non-specific. That is, they will fight against any type of antigens in the same way. That is, they will be able to distinguish among the various types of microorganism that tries to penetrate their body. As we have discussed that the adaptive immunity is further subclassified into two types, that is the humoral immunity as well as the cell-mediated immunity. So now let's look what this immunity is about. The first one is the humoral immunity. Humoral immunity is mediated by the antibodies which is produced by the B lymphocytes. These B lymphocytes usually matures in the bone marrow. This humoral immunity is the principal defense mechanism against any extracellular microorganism and their toxins and assists them in eliminating from the body. Whereas the cell mediated immunity is mediated by the cytokines which is produced by the T lymphocytes. These T lymphocytes matures in the thymus gland. The humoral immunity is mediated by the antibodies, whereas the cell-mediated immunity is mediated by the cytokines. In humoral immunity, we've seen that it is produced by the B lymphocytes, which matures in the bone marrow, whereas in the cell-mediated immunity, we have seen that which matures in the thymus gland. We have also seen that in the humoral immunity, the defense mechanism is against the extracellular microbes, whereas in the cell-mediated immunity, the defense mechanism is against the intracellular microbes. In this cell-mediated immunity, there are two types of T which regulates the cell-mediated immunity, such as the helper T cell as well as the cytotoxic T cells. So here we've come to the end of this topic where we have discussed about what an immunity is. We have also discussed about the three lines of defense, which is the first, second, and the third line of defense. Here we've learned that the first line of defense consists of the physical barrier as well as the chemical barrier. We've also learned that second line of defense consists of the defensive cell, defensive proteins, inflammation, as well as fever. And in the third line of defense, we've learned about the immunities. We've come to know that there are two types of immunity, that is natural and acquired. We've also learned that the acquired immunity is furthermore divided into four types of immunity. We've also learned about what an innate immunity as well as adaptive immunity. I hope you guys have understood this topic. If not, you can once again have a glance at this video. I'll be coming with another new topic in my next session. Till then, thank you and bye.